Welcome to Film Strip, movie reviews presented by Continuous Play Podcast. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I am Jay!
And I am Kurt Fabish.
And this is our review of Spartacus, starring Kirk Douglas, Laurence Olivier, Gene Simmons, Charles Lofton, Peter Ustinov, John Gavin, and Tony Curtis. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, released in 1960 on a budget of $12 million, grossed $60 million at the box office, won 4 Academy Awards, though not for Best Actor, Best Picture, Best Director, one for other things. But This is an interesting one in our Kubrick retrospective here, Kurt, because it's the only one that Kubrick didn't have complete creative control over. He was brought in at the behest of Douglas because the original director, David Lean, turned it down, and then Anthony Mann, who had done like Winchester 73 and stuff like that, shot for a week, and Douglas felt like he didn't really get it and didn't get the scope of the picture, so he canned him and brought in Kubrick as a, like, hey, will you do me a favor, Stanley? I like my experience on Paths of Glory, and Kubrick battled with the screenwriter. He didn't like the material. He thought Spartacus, the character, was too pure and perfect. He didn't, and really, this is like the one film it is that he didn't really like. He didn't like what he did out of it.
Oh yeah, Kubrick, he's flat out disowned the film after that, and it really stands out watching. All I have left to see is Lolita, but like I've seen when you watch all the movies, it is so clear this movie is not a film that was conceived by Kubrick. Like, because Kubrick, he takes years between films, years to come up with a good idea to make a movie, and this is the exact opposite, where he was just hired as a total workman director, like any other schlub, really.
Yeah.
And you can really tell that he did not write it, he did not cast it. He didn't approve of the set designs or the costume, or this isn't his story, and he definitely did not have control over the editing. Like his last movies were all under 90 minutes, and this movie is 3 hours with the credits and the overture and intermission and stuff.
Oh yeah, it's 3:15 as it goes. And this was a time like nowadays, we're recording this and releasing it in 2017. We're in the midst of the Marvel DC superhero just renaissance or genre push, right? In the 1950s and 60s, the big historically based epic was that version of it. I mean, you had Ben-Hur, you had El Cid, who came after this, you had, all these movies. Lawrence of Arabia would come out a couple years after this. All of these huge movies, Greatest Story Ever Told, Ten Commandments, all those things that, oddly enough, we talked about some years back when you and Nick and I reviewed Gladiator.
That's right.
And watching this, what I didn't realize was how much Ridley Scott ripped off out of this. I mean, I was like, that's actually theft. I mean, so there's whole scenes that I'm like, well, that's just Spartacus redone. I feel about this the way that like Fincher talks about Alien 3. It's how Kubrick is with this one. It's he didn't want anything to do with it. He's sorry he ever did it, and he wishes it would go away. So, which is sad to say because while it doesn't have maybe the accolades, and honestly, the critical acclaim at the time for it, people didn't really get it. They didn't like it. I mean, it made money because these things made money at the time, but it didn't get the praise that the other contemporary films like it got. And maybe that's another reason too. This one kind of sticks out, but it is weird to think about Stanley Kubrick as director for hire, but you gotta do something.
Yeah. And that might come up a few times. Like watching this movie as a Kubrick fan, it's tough to watch thinking, man, like imagine it, like, because Kubrick, he tends to do he does one movie of a different genre and he never touches that genre again. It's like, it's kind of a missed opportunity. It's like, man, it'd be awesome if like Kubrick came up with his own Roman epic of some kind with fictional characters or whatever it is. Like, who knows what that would have been? Maybe it would have been a comedy, or would have been something incredibly dark, or not, like Paths of Glory, or something black and white. But but who knows? Instead, we got this movie, which while it is a classic, like it or not, like everyone knows this movie. But one guy who certainly doesn't like it was Kubrick.
I think most people knew it because of Douglas and the rest of the cast. Yeah. And this cast is amazing, and we'll talk about all of them, but Douglas in particular. I mean, this was his passion project. He read the book it's sort of based on and really got into it. He got the screenwriter write it, and this was a big controversy at the time. This was a guy that had been blacklisted because he wouldn't do the whole names in the communist witch hunt of the McCarthy era, and Douglas really went out on the limb like, no, this guy's not going to be credited under a pseudonym. It's his, and I want his name on it, and this is ridiculous. And Kennedy was a fan of this film and helped kind of break down some of that stuff. But it's all got that historical context. And what's funny is you see that infused throughout the movie. There's so many things in it where I feel like that's a Red Scare.
Oh yeah.
Discuss and all this, all the stuff, all the scenes and everything. We'll get into those, but I do think it's neat though. And when you talk about, what if Kubrick had gone back to this? I mean, there's some big scenes in Barry Lyndon we'll eventually talk about, but if he had ever made the Napoleon movie he wanted to make, maybe we would have got it. Cause I mean, if you've heard our buddy John Jansen from the Hollywood Gauntlet talk about the making of that, and he's an expert on it, it's amazing the lengths that Kubrick went to. It was something he spent years doing, never got done, and then he turned around and did The Shining. So, again, okay. So, but had he ever got that one done, maybe Napoleon would have been his big war epic or whatever. But even that, the plans for it, everything I've read about it, and I understand there's like books on it and stuff, but everything I've read about it was that it was going to be this big epic, but it was really going to be like this very small, and narrow in on Napoleon himself. Yeah. So, you don't get the standard Kubrick things in here. I do think you see some of it, some of the big sweeping shots, and there are some scenes when they're going over like all the saloon bodies and stuff. I feel like I was watching Paths of Glory just in color again.
Yeah, a little bit, and definitely like this is a very dialogue heavy movie. And you look at the second half of Kubrick's career, and they're very not dialogue heavy. Some of them have lots of dialogue, but like they're very much like visual films. Like even something like Clockwork Orange, which is very story heavy. That is a movie you can almost turn the sound off and you can still exactly what's going on. I don't know if that's the case with Spartacus. There's a lot of like political intrigue. You gotta you really for what is a pretty simple plot, you really do gotta pay attention quite a bit for the whole 3 hours.
You got to take a class in Roman history too, because I'm just going to say it right now. I'm going to butcher a lot of names here, and that's just going to be.
As am I. Yeah.
I may just wind up calling these people by the actors playing them before it's all said and done.
Possibly. Yeah.
Maybe simpler than Smissimicus and all this other stuff because it gets a little. Yeah. It's kind of like trying to read out of the 1611 King James. I mean, it can be done, but I don't know why you'd want to. So, yeah. I mean, not in modern era, but it's though, that said, it's a long epic and it's a lot of exposition, and you're right, that's something that you don't get a lot of. I feel like that is the screenwriter and Douglas who really had a lot to say, and that's one of the things Kubrick didn't like. Was there's too much dialogue in this film. There's too much talking. This guy's way too this. Why nobody cares about any of this. And I think you can look at the political intrigue in it, and I'm going, this would be the kind of thing that a guy like Aaron Sorkin would totally get off on. It's his kind of movie before he really was before he was even really doing anything, right? But it feels a lot like if this was modern day, Sorkin would have been the one that wrote this.
Pretty much, yeah. It's like this movie. It's juggling a lot of balls, trying to be a couple different movies. And I would say without a doubt, if there's one part of this movie, like if you made this movie today, you would lose the political intrigue stuff mostly. Like you watch Gladiator, the extended cut, that has the political stuff, and the theatrical cut that won Best Picture has maybe 2 or 3 scenes of political intrigue, because that's the first stuff you need to go. Like especially when you look at the story of like just as a random thing, like the character of Julius Caesar in the grand scheme of things, you could take him out of this movie and you definitely wouldn't miss him because the movie's called Spartacus,
Right. But having him in there adds a layer to it that does make it neat. That you have this person playing this, everyone knows that character mostly from the tragedy written about him by Shakespeare, right? Or alleged Shakespeare. But if you believe it like that, but people can conceptualize around that. What I got a kick out of was all like the voiceover stuff about the fall of the Roman Empire and the coming of Christ and all this. And I'm like, these things are all a long time after this movie's supposed to be happening. And what I found out is like the American Catholic League like forced that to be in there. I thought, wow, there was a time when they had that kind of power in Hollywood. Nowadays, no way. But just think about that. It would be like akin today of when you had a movie like Man of Steel, let's say, there would be like the Department of Homeland Security talking about the 278 9/11s that happened in that movie. Yeah, there would be something like them controlling the fictional universe or whatever. It's just neat to think about the time that this was made. But it was also something that's very brash. I mean, there's a lot of violence in this movie. If Kubrick had had his way, you'd have seen a lot more. Like, he was into the blood and gore, and I found that intriguing because that's never been something I really associated with him. Even when we get around to talking about The Shining, the gore in that's relatively minimal when you think about it. And to think about him wanting to do that here is, it's like Ridley Scott said, "Oh, I can do that," and then him and Russell Crowe and CGI killed a lot of people. So and won Oscars for it. Darn it! But anyway, So I think it's time to do a plot summary for this. And again, is one that I don't know if people maybe know about it, maybe they haven't seen it in a while. So sum up a 3-hour epic if you can in a few paragraphs here, Kurt.
Sure, I'll do my best here, and apologies to any Romans who might be listening if I mess up the names here, but. In the first century before Christ, the Roman Republic is rampant with corruption and its menial work done by its armies of slaves. Spartacus, born and raised a slave, is sold to gladiator trainer Batiatus. There he meets Varinia, a beautiful slave from Britain, and they fall in love. After weeks of being trained to kill for the arena, Spartacus turns on his owners and leads the other slaves in a revolt. The uprising soon spreads across the Italian peninsula, involving thousands of slaves. The plan is to acquire the sufficient funds to acquire ships from Silesian pirates who could then transport them to lands away from Rome in the south. The Roman senator Gracchus schemes to have Marcus Glabrus, commander of the garrison of Rome, to lead an army against the slaves that are living in Vesuvius. When Glabrus is defeated, his mentor, Senator and General Crassus, is greatly embarrassed and leads his own army against the slaves. Spartacus and the thousands of freed slaves successfully make their way south, only to find that the Silesians have abandoned them. The superior military of Rome proceeds to crush the army of Spartacus. Crassus then finds Varinia and her newborn baby on the battlefield and befriends her. He fails in an attempt to seduce her, and out of malice orders that Spartacus and his comrade Antoninus are to engage in a fight to the death, and the survivor is to be crucified. Antoninus is defeated by Spartacus, who suffers the slow death of crucifixion with his slave companions beside him. But before Spartacus dies, Varinia, fleed through the influence of Gracchus, shows him their son, a free Roman citizen now.
That's a good summary, Kurt. I think that really gets us through the through line of the film, and it is a rather simple plot. It's a slave uprising. It's their plan for overcoming the entire empire, if you will, and how that completely falls apart. So it would be like if Star Wars: A New Hope happened, The Empire Strikes Back happened, and then the plan on the Return of the Jedi completely failed. And Luke Skywalker and Han Solo were crucified for their efforts. That would be what this would be.
It's the original Rogue One of the 60s.
Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, I had to compare it to something else. We're talking about a movie that's, 57 years old at this point. And we've already done, gone older than that at this. But what's neat to me is all that political side of it or whatever. Like, I feel like this push and pull with these generals and the garrison and the senators. I'm like, this is Paths of Glory just told in the Roman Empire again. I can see those same guys with those same machinations, except instead of doing it in court, they did go brutal and just fight.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the way to talk about this, because the plot is rather simple, and that's the whole thing, is rather than just walk through it, because we can talk about the big scenes, but let's talk about like the characters and the way that they're portrayed and stuff. And I mean, you have to start with the title character, right? Kirk Douglas as Spartacus. It's one of his most memorable roles, but he didn't win an Oscar for this. And I'm curious, like, do you think that's correct, or do you think that's probably a little backlash from the controversy surrounding the film, or what is it you think that maybe people missed, or the Academy missed at least, in because he didn't even get nominated?
Yeah, it's like, and he is very good in the movie, but like, yeah, this movie maybe just was a little overlooked. Like it wasn't like looking back, it just is surprising that a movie this notable that everyone knows is like usually all those movies are nominated for Best Picture when because like Ben-Hur was up for everything and won 11 Oscars, but this movie was overlooked from the story POV, the technical side. Like it won Oscars for cinematography and probably sound and like costume and stuff. But yeah, it was overlooked from like a real critical standpoint.
The nominees for Best Picture that year, just so you know, were The Apartment, which won, The Alamo, Elmer Gantry, Sons and Lovers, and The Sundowners. And Burt Lancaster won for Elmer Gantry as Best Actor. Elizabeth Taylor won for Butterfield 8. Peter Ustinov did win Best Supporting Actor. He's the one actor. Right. Thing. But, writing was... He wasn't nominated, wasn't even thought of. I wonder if some of that did play into it. The thing is I think about like iconic Douglas performances, and the funny thing to think about is maybe aside from the baby that was his kid in the movie, he's outlived the entire like cast. So, amazing. Because he's still with us as of this recording in summer of 2017, and I'm like, where this even ranks in his oeuvre, I wonder. I know it was important for him, but I try to think about his career, and I go, I don't know where I would even put his portrayal of Spartacus. I think it's strong. It's really good. But I'm saying that by someone who's seen films that was clearly influenced by this film. So it's hard to not watch this and go, oh, that's like the time that Russell Crowe did this, or it's like that time in King Arthur. And, it's hard to... I mean, one thing I didn't confuse it with was Transformers: The Last Night. Mark Wahlberg has nothing on this, but but I mean, really, like I wonder, like of all the things he did in Harm's Way, some of the big films he was a part of. I don't know, how big is this in the Kirk Douglas lexicon, you think?
Well, as far as notoriety, it's probably the most famous film he did, but as far as performance, I think he is good in the movie. I've seen him be better. I think he's very good, and he's way better than the character, because the screen. I don't think the screenplay is that strong, and it really is. You pick and choose. Some actors, a lot of the actors are better than others. It's pretty random. But Kirk Douglas is one of the better ones. But I've seen him be a lot better in movies. Like he was a lot better in in Paths of Glory, where you really got to. He got to flex his acting muscles a bit more. And this one, it's a lot more physical, and it is pretty good. His performance, like in the first hour of this movie, where, I mean, it takes about an hour for him to say more than 10 words.
Yeah. And
it's interesting to have like a big Hollywood epic with a world famous leading man who barely speaks for the first hour. That is, I don't know if that's Kubrick or if that's just the screenplay, but that is a pretty unique thing of the movie.
That's the screenplay. That is completely the screenplay, and the way that Douglas wanted that to slowly unravel and reveal. And it's the thing Kubrick hated. He felt like it kept the character so pure. I mean, you really don't get to understand who Spartacus is until after. Like, there's two big scenes when he gets captured and sold into slavery, and then trained as a fighter. They throw Verena at him, and like he's supposed to just take advantage of her and, to use modern phrase, hit it and quit it. And he doesn't do that. And so when he bumps into her later, they have this whole respect for each other. That's when you get to, like, this guy's got some morality to him. And then he gets in a fight with an African slave, and he's dead. The guy could kill him, but he decides not to. And that moment of mercy, like, really changes the way he operates, because he spares a general later on, and he spares somebody else. And then you could even argue, when he kills Tony Curtis's character, Antonius, at the end, that he's really just sparing him a more painful death. And I don't know, to go back to the performance thing for just a sec, I don't know that it's one of his better ones either, though, Kurt. I'll be honest, like, Passive Glory, I think he's better in that than he was this, and I think he's better in another film from the same year as Passive Glory, The Gunfight at the OK Corral. That's a fantastic performance if you've ever seen it. And he's, like, really good in it. I look at this and I feel like it's sort of obvious that he's playing this character. Like, it seems like this would have been the thing you wanted him to do, but I mean, he played Vincent van Gogh for once, in his career. That's so much more of a nuanced performance. This seems so like the caricature of the mighty, rebellious, hero.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty, what's the word? I don't know about, it's not as bad as, but it's a pretty blueprint.
You know
rebellion.
what it is? It's the way Brandon Routh played Superman in Superman Returns. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just too obvious. It's like the best Christopher Reeve impression you could get, and that sort of feels like what that movie is. And I kind of feel about Douglas as Spartacus the same way. It's like, it's almost too on the point in some ways.
Well, as I understand it, I don't know if this is correct or not. As I understand it, this entire film, like Kirk Douglas being the producer of it and getting this movie made, is made almost out of spite because he wanted to be Ben-Hur. When that movie was made, and at the time, given his stature, he very easily could have been cast as Ben-Hur, but he wasn't. Charlton Heston was, and he said, "What? I still want to do a Roman epic. Somebody write me one." And then you got, and that's how Dalton Trumbo and them work together.
Yeah, I mean, you could also limit to the fact that Charlton Heston's probably a foot taller than him too, and commands a little bit more. Well, I don't know that. He commands a lot of presence. Both of them command tons of presence. There's no doubt about that. But Heston is so much more imposing, and he had done the Ten Commandments, and I think people just sort of saw him in this thing. It probably irks him even more that he did Ben-Hur, and then Heston turned around and won Best Actor for El Cid from the director that he fired working on this movie. So I'm sure it sticks in his craw a little bit, but it feels like Vanity Project and Revenge Project all in the same light. It would be it would be as if, what was it we did? The Prestige, and what was the other magic film?
The Illusionist.
The Illusionist. It would be like if one of those was made in spite of the other one directly, and the performance was informed as such, when it really wasn't. It was just competing projects. So but he's good in it. But I'll tell you, he's not my favorite thing in this movie, and I'm just going to say it now. Laurence Olivier is my favorite thing in this movie. I think I could watch that guy read the phone book on a screen for an hour, and I would be entertained. That man's screen presence and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that he was so great on the stage and just knew how to roll dialogue off of his palate in a way that just gripped you. Like, he's such a bastard in this movie, but you feel for him in some way because he's kind of like, well, if you like the way Kevin Spacey portrays Frank Underwood on House of Cards, it's sort of that same thing. You're like, I shouldn't root for the sumbitch, but I really like him, and he's just, you get him. And he's my favorite thing in the film by far.
Well, then this is awkward because I'd have to say I'm a fan of Olivier in the films I've seen him in, but I was not really a fan of this. It's difficult. Like, a lot of the characters in this movie, because Kubrick was like it's not a, like, Kubrick's movies are all very precise. This movie was like everyone was kind of doing their own thing, acting in their own movie. And there's the acting style of a Kirk Douglas and the acting style of Olivier, and they're totally different. And I think the character of Crassus is good, but as a villain in this film, I don't think he's a particularly memorable villain. I think it's kind of a way. While Olivier is good in the movie, I think it's kind of a waste of his caliber. Like, I think of a movie like Gladiator, like you got Joaquin Phoenix, and I think he's very much a younger version of Crassus, and he was a bit more. He was a bit more openly evil and pathetic, and not a character to get behind, but a character. It was easier to get inside of his head, or I can't put my finger on it, but I just know that like Crassus, to me, was not nearly as effective a villain as Spartacus was a hero. It's like in the movie, a movie I love, Braveheart. It's like Mel Gibson is as good as I can't remember the name of the guy who played Edward Longshanks, but like he was as evil as Wallace was good, and there was that dynamic was good. But the dynamic between Crassus and Spartacus, I mean, like for one thing, they don't see each other or even know each other's names or whatever until like the almost the last scene. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a good character. But as far as like Kubrick movies are concerned, I would say this isn't a particularly memorable villain.
Well, see, I don't even put that on Kubrick. I think, again, that's a product of script, and you've got a producer as the lead actor, so obviously he's getting all the best stuff. I felt like Olivier was handed a really shallow villain, and instead of playing it as mustache-twirling evil, he brought the nuance of something like Othello to it, of like, this guy really, from his own point of view, is not a really bad guy, but he's forced into these. He's just like the rest of Rome. He's so compromised and so corrupted that he can't get out of his own way sometimes. And he has the same motivations as the Joaquin Phoenix character in Gladiator. I mean, it's basically because he can't woo a woman that he just gets pissed off to kill the gladiator. That's the same thing that happens. There's a lot more to it, but that's the same thing that happens in Gladiator. It's you murder me over a woman, as Jack Nicholson says in Batman. I mean, it's the same thing. Yeah. But I like the fact that I think he gave what you're not wrong. The role's not grand, okay? I think he gave what could have been a really like cardboard character something so much more. I enjoyed him in it. I found myself wanting more of what he was doing instead of what I got with all the other stuff. But I'm an Olivier sucker though. I think, when he does things, I mean, he can be in something really crappy and I still think it's pretty good. Have you ever seen that Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow? Let me just go ahead and save everybody some trouble. That's not very good, but he's in some quote archive footage in that, and he's still good in that piece of garbage. You know what? He's really good in that piece of crap Clash of Titans Harry Hamlin thing from the 80s. That's a cheesy movie, but he's good as Zeus. I mean, that was what I thought Zeus should look like, was Laurence Olivier growing up. So I liked him. I'm glad we differed on it though, because that's, we watch these things sometimes, we both have the same experience with it. I liked him. So I'm going to ask you then, what was your favorite performance? If it's not him, and I don't get a sense that it's Douglas, I'm curious as to who you really gravitated toward in the film.
Well, it's kind of a tie between two characters, because like when I talk about like every actor's like in their own movie, I felt like these two guys were on the same page. And that's, Batiatus, played by Peter Ustinov, and Gracchus, played by Charles Lawton. I love both of those characters and the actors and the performances. I love them in their scenes together. As I understand it, Peter Ustinov himself, he actually wrote the scenes with Gracchus, or like, and maybe whatever it is, like those scenes are a little bit better than the rest of the movie, but I really do love Batiatus Ustinov, who did win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for this movie, deservedly so. Mm-hmm. This makes him the only person who's won an Oscar for a performance in a Kubrick movie, and the only other guy that was never nominated was Peter Sellers in Doctor Strangelove, and that's pretty weird in the scheme of Oscar history. But
that just tells you how screwed up Oscar history is.
Yeah, a little bit, But I think Ustinov is amazing in this movie. He really is. Like, this is one thing that, like, from the screenplay and everything, it's a great character that is perfectly executed. He is such a scumbag character who definitely doesn't think of himself as a scumbag. He thinks he's just a businessman, But he's very funny, which makes his character really entertaining. Like, I love the first scene where he's examining the slaves, at that mine on the side of a mountain. And his servant is holding his umbrella. His whole job is to hold the umbrella to block the sun. And when he turns around and sees that the sun's not blocking, he just looks at him and says, "The sun's over there. God, would I pay these people?" And he is good. He reminds me a lot of the character that Paul, of all things, that Paul Giamatti played in Planet of the Apes as this wacky. He was like the character in Spartacus. He is very much a comic relief character as well as a total dirtbag. And he reminds me a lot of that character in Planet of the Apes, and also the character that Paul Giamatti played in 12 Years a Slave, but who was much less funny, but it was kind of the same guy.
You know who I knew Charles Laughton's name, and I was like, have I seen him in something? Where's it? And no, it's Night of the Hunter. He directed that Mitchum film. If you've ever seen that.
And
I didn't realize that until I looked it up later. I was like, holy cow, that's where I know that name from. That's a powerful film as well, and well done. And I mean, I think he's good. I love Peter Ustinov too. I'm glad you mentioned him. He's a neat kind of guy, and just has I don't know. He's got both of these guys have somewhat of the jovial type presence in the film. Batias much more is the comic relief. I think you're dead on with that. But I feel like both of these guys bring a little bit of lightness because I mean, Douglas is playing this so lockjawed, pissed off serious the whole time that he never has a moment where he just chills out a little bit.
Oh yeah. Batias is much more of a realistic guy. This is probably the kind of guy you would see in much more as in Rome, like just day to day, the slavery is the trade of the day, and that's just he's just another guy doing his thing. And Charles Laughton as Gracchus, I do love this guy Charles Laughton, and I've only seen him in really just two movies, this and the Billy Wilder film Witness for the Prosecution, where he plays this aged lawyer. I think it's based on an Agatha Christie book, but that's a great film and an amazing performance by him. But mostly I know him as the guy who before Spartacus had a tragically short-lived directing career where he made a total of one film, and that film was Night of the Hunter. And I would say arguably that is the single best film of the 1950s, and that's a whole other discussion. But he only made one film, and to me, it's like I put him on the directing Mount Rushmore. But also as an actor, he's tremendous in this movie, to the point where he was so good, where it's like, God, it's almost like a waste of Charles Laughton. Where I would totally watch a whole movie about this guy's political career as opposed to the life of Spartacus. And like I say, it feels like every actor might be in their own movie, but those scenes with Peter Ustinov and Charles Laughton together, I think they were awesome together. And I do love the arc of Peter Ustinov, of Batias, how he starts off as this slave owner, and over the course of the film and the uprising, little by little, he just spends the entire second half of the movie being bossed around and ordered what to do and being made in his own way a slave. And I think Ustinov plays that very funny when he's told, I want you to go over to Crassus and get for it. And he's like, I don't really want to do that at all. And but he, then he throws some money at him and he goes and does it.
Well, even in the very end, I mean, that's basically what he's doing, is paying for safe passage as he and Farida are heading out, right? I mean, he's still, but he's sort of that, he's only in it for the money. He has that arc where he sort of gets a heart about himself the whole time, and he's funny because we laugh with him, but that's his arc through the film. He's almost like the everyman we're supposed to follow through this, because who the hell can relate to Spartacus?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and moreover, because it's portrayed the way it is, and look, I just talked about how much I like Kirk Douglas and I like him in this movie. You can't relate to that at all. I mean, nobody can, because let's just call it out now. The Christ metaphor here is as heavy as they could have just named him J.C. Spartacus for all that mattered. Yeah. I mean, it's as obvious as the rat in The Departed. I mean, it really is. Yeah. All the way down to the learns mercy, sacrifice, talks about sacrificing himself for others, does it eventually, and then dies between a bunch of thieving slaves.
Literally crucified.
Yeah. So, of course, Jesus didn't see the sun. That was the Scorsese tie-in later. That was something different. Yeah. But anyway. See, now I know where he ripped off stuff from too, man. So, I've learned through all the years of if you go back through cinema enough, people, what you're going to realize is that everyone has plagiarized everyone forever, and it will never end. And what's funny to me is I hope I live long enough that in 40 years somebody decides to plagiarize a Michael Bay movie, and I want to see what that looks like.
That'd be something else.
That would be. It really would be. So probably Bay's kids or something. But anyway, they're kind of smaller characters, but we should talk about Antonius and Verita and things. Poor Gene Simmons in a late 50s, 60s movie for a woman. It's just, I'm going to say it again, man. Kubrick just doesn't know what to do with these. Now, again, this time it's not really his fault because she's written as the damsel, and that's all she is in this movie, or Mary Magdalene, or whatever she's supposed to be. But I kind of feel bad for her that she might have been on the set and been like, there are nothing but men here, and I am really bored. So with all of this, they gave her nothing to do. That poor woman, she just stood there and looked pretty.
Pretty much, her whole character is just as an excuse to get to the end of Spartacus seeing that, you know, he has a son that will, a legacy that'll live on. And, you know, and the wife, never mind about that.
It's the whole, she's only there to give him a male heir that he knows is a free citizen. I'm like, God, that just feels so icky. And I know I'm applying my 21st century post-feminist, male knowledge of all of that. But you just can't watch this movie and not feel like, why is there even a woman in here? Because I've seen critical stuff about like him and Antonius have this whole relationship we don't know about. I don't know if that's there or not, but I think people are reading it into it. But it's also because there's a complete lack of women in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
There probably weren't on the set, but they definitely weren't on camera. That's for sure. So, just knowing the 60s, but
for a movie set in the height of the Roman Empire, there's a very small amount of sex.
Well, they are the Roman Republic, technically.
That's true.
And as the old joke goes, the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, was neither totally Roman nor an empire.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's that. It's kind of a waste. You talk about wasted role. Now, Tony Curtis playing a character basically named Tony. I got a chuckle out of that. I was like, why did you just call him Tony? Maybe that was his like stipulation. Like, look, I'll do it, but just you got to give me a fun name. So I like Tony Curtis. I kind of picture him as sort of the lost member of the Rat Pack, maybe. Like he really sort of ran in that same circle to me, and so I've always liked him. This is it's not a useless role. It's a nothing role. It's the sacrifice role that helps Spartacus get ready to be crucified, but it's not much more. But he's supposed to be like best buddy, his Chewie to his Han, whatever.
Yeah, I got a bit of almost like a sort of surrogate father-son relationship by the end of it. In which case, Tony Curtis is way too old to be playing a character who's supposed to be even though I don't know, like this is him at the start, like maybe the start of his career. He looks about the same age as Kirk Douglas, and he's got I didn't know they had a lot of guys from 1950s New York in Rome. But
John Wayne once played Fu Manchu, so
exactly. He gives a good performance for sure. Like it's the only thing is the accent does a little stand up, a lot like Harvey Keitel in Last Temptation of Christ with thickest Bronx accent in Jerusalem. I don't know if I buy it.
Jesus, I don't know if these apostles are, it's the same thing. Right? Well, that was more Brando, I guess, than Keitel. But either way, you get the point. But they had an actual black guy play the African slave. It wasn't just a man that was tan. So that, I'll give him credit for that. So, of course, he gets speared in the back. So it's horrible, but.
He is, but about him, Woody Strode, a very tiny role, but he was nominated for a Golden Globe for this. And Woody Strode is actually, he only says about, 5 words in this movie too. But the few words he says, I love this character that we see. Like he shows up as one of the veteran gladiators of the camp, and when Spartacus just tries to befriend him, he says, I don't want to know your name.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It's like, I don't want to befriend you because I might have to kill you one day. And then, of course, it comes down to that scene where he should be killing him. Like it's the thumbs down moment, like from Gladiator, and he can't do it because he's talked to him that one time and he knows him too well. But yeah, he is good. I do like Woody Strode. He has a very like unique presence. He actually was a really good actor, and he was in a bunch of John Ford movies, and I know mainly from his one scene in the opening credits of Once Upon a Time in the West. But I did like him. I think if you made this movie today, I'm reminded immediately of Gladiator. the Jaimon Hansu character, who's in the whole film. If I made this movie today, it's like, never mind Tony Curtis. This is the guy you need as his co-leader of the rebellion there.
That's what I was like wanting, I think, from this film. For the reason that he spares Spartacus is that for some reason he has become part of the cause, and he decides, you know what, this guy needs to live, and so that's when he sacrifices himself. It's all foreshadowing so that Spartacus can learn to do that later for someone else, even though he kills somebody when he does it. But he's sparing Tony from the crucifixion death. So it's more noble that way. But I kind of wanted... We've already had the seeds of the rebellion there with Spartacus at that. I wish that had been planted before. Like I felt like it would be more impactful for me if he did that, knowing that this guy's got to live so that everything can go on. You know, it's Jen and a dude on the beach that decide, you know, they're going to die because they know that the plans have got to go onto the Death Star and live, right? So we're just going to go back to that. But I mean, I think that's half of the fun of doing something like this is we're looking for like the Kubrick stuff. There's no Kubrick stuff in this movie. So if we talk about this movie is how can you relate this to a modern audience? Because Kurt, you're probably the youngest person I know in the world that's ever even seen this. Most people, you say Spartacus now, they talk about that show that's been on. Right, which has plenty of your Game of Thrones style sex and blood and crazy stuff in it, right? But how would you get somebody to watch this that's 20? You know, as well, because the themes are still today. Like, you can see it.
It is, and I was thinking about that just overall with this movie is like, this is one of the few old Hollywood epics that like, I got all my recommendations for movies like that, you know, way back from my dad. He was the guy who would tell me, "Oh, you got to watch this. You got to watch High Noon. You got to watch Fistful of Dolls or whatever." And he never, or you got to see like 10 Commandments. He recommended that. He never recommended Spartacus once. And I was wondering that like all this time. It's like it's such a notable movie, and you really never hear anyone talk about this movie aside from the "I'm Spartacus" scene. And then I finally, you know, when I sat down and watched it, I was like, oh, that's why. Because it's not all that, it's, you know, there's not, like, aside from the I'm Spartacus scene, there isn't really a real standout moment, like, you know, like a Ben-Hur chariot race scene. Yeah. Like, you got the battle scene, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things, like, when they're leading the troops out of the mountain and it's shot in that one shot in the foreground and there's all that smoke and the horses are riding up, like, it's a gorgeous looking thing, but it's like watching a moving Monet painting or something.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, and the battle scene even, like, it's cool, but I saw better in Ben-Hur. I saw cooler stuff in the 10 Commandments when the Jordan crashed over all the, you know, Egyptians. I think I'd seen that done better, and I wonder if that's Kubrick trying to figure out how to do something on that large a scale. And I mean, it is impressive if you look at it, the way that that's shot and pieced together and everything. There's a lot of people in that scene. But I even feel like there are scenes in Gone with the Wind in 1939 that are better battle scenes than in Spartacus. Like, I really wanted to see these great battle scenes, and I watched it and I was like, yeah, that's a lot better in older films. And then I saw it done a lot better later on too. Like, say what you will about Braveheart and kind of its you know, cheesiness that it had. I mean, there's a cheesy factor to that movie, but there's some awesome fighting in that. Hell, the first Highlander movie has better battle scenes to me, man. That may be blasphemous for people, but I think it looks better.
It does, and yeah, and again, this all like every flaw in this movie, it's very easy to point to, and there's no, I don't know if there's a particular person to blame. Like, it's not Kubrick's fault, but it's you know, that is why there's a certain lack of cohesion. You know, why certain, like, who knows, maybe if Anthony Mann made this, maybe it would be a lot better. Maybe it would have been worse. Maybe the action would have been better, but who knows? Yeah,
well, I mean, if you wanted to know what it would look like if Anthony Mann make it, go watch El Cid.
Yeah,
there's your answer. Is it would look like that? And if you haven't seen El Cid, I do recommend it. It's a more watchable film than this. Like, there's nothing wrong with this movie in particular. There's just nothing that makes me go like, yes, champion it. And so I understand why this one maybe missed on people. It's because it was just another 3-hour sword and sandal epic. It was just kind of like, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we get those. Like, Hollywood's always obsessed with these. They're probably no more obsessed with anything than this maybe than King Arthur, which they can never do right. They've never done right, in my opinion. I think it's ever looked right, in any form. Sorry, Transformers fans, but it's never worked. And but I think they're just obsessed with the idea of trying to get that to look right. Because it is a cool idea. I mean, it's one thing to have guns and missiles and shit shooting at each other. But, like, there's something really, like, primal about men running at each other with just pieces of metal, swinging them to try to kill each other. Because the sword back in those days, like, it was really more for stabbing than it was for Conan the Barbarianing people and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You got hit with a sword, it was more likely to knock you out than to do anything. And the point was to get you on the ground so I can stab you, not so I can cut your friggin' head off. And it's not a lightsaber duel as much as it's a blunt instrument so I can stab you to death. So
yeah, it's like a blunt butcher knife fighting.
Yes.
was the order of the day.
Yeah. So, I mean, imagine that. Yeah, I try to think about, like, if you made something like this today and you gave it to a director that really understood what the visceral violence of it was, like, you could go in extremes. You could get like Michael Mann doing it, and so there'd be a lot of nuanced character and stuff. But you would know everything about the damn sword that you ever wanted to know because he knows everything about the guns, right? Because his movies, in a lot of ways, are good gun porn, especially his crime movies and stuff. But when you like somebody like Tarantino, right, would get the visceral like violence of what that would be like. Rob Zombie would take it way too far, but Tarantino would probably know how to do it. And make you buy it and see, because that was the thing that I did feel like was Hollywood washover with the fight scenes, because I felt like that's not like, for everything this movie's trying to be so historically accurate and all this exposition and less action and more talky, when they get to doing the action, it's just cookie cutter. I'm like, that's not at all how that works. And I know that now because I've studied history and I watch way too much History Channel and stuff like that. But even then, you could kind of see like that wouldn't really be how that worked.
Yeah, that's why I am a big fan of Gladiator for a number of reasons, and one of them is the action and that violence. Like, as much as it was they were going for a history thing. When it came down to the violence, it really was like, it was action movie. It wasn't as far as horror movie, but it was nice and brutal when it came to those swords and stabbing a guy. Like Russell Crowe, he stabs a guy with two swords and then takes him out of him and cuts the guy's head off with a double swing. Moments like that, and that is kind of missing from this movie, and I think that is something Kubrick would have done if he made this movie like 1985 or something. Oh,
if they'd have let him do it then, he would have had it that way. I mean, he wanted it to be that way, and they just said no and cut it back. Think about the big battle scene Jon Snow led last on the most recent season of Game of Thrones, right?
Oh yeah,
the way those battle scenes go, like that's I think kind of what I wanted. What I wish this movie had. I didn't really want it necessarily because I knew I wasn't going to get it in a movie in 1960. But and I mean, just think for a minute. Can you imagine a 1960s crowd watching, something like the Battle of Blackwater?
They'd be running out of the room.
I mean, there would be pitchforks and fire in the street.
Big time.
But that would almost be funny to see. So. Where's my DeLorean so I can go do that? Anyway, but the themes of this whole film, the rebellion and the struggle for freedom and the whole thing of like the common man wanting a better life for his future and setting that with gladiators in Rome. And I don't know. I mean, again, those are universal themes that just get repeated over and over. And I think they do because they work. That's how people can relate to. I mean, the through line of something like of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath. I mean, there's the characters and you buy into their story and stuff, but it's really just about people trying to make it better for tomorrow, and trying to have a better life. And I mean, Spartacus dies horribly, but he dies knowing that his son is a free Roman citizen, which is what he was fighting for all along to begin with, right? So he gets what he wants. He just not the way he wanted it necessarily.
Yeah, that is something about this movie overall. Is like, well, I don't think the dialogue is all that great. I can't really fault like the overall the plot and the story, which I don't know how much of it is real and how much of it is fiction. But
almost none of it is real. So I
got that feeling. But
but
it is a really good story, and I definitely got like Gladiator. We're talking about that a lot, but I got a little bit of flares of Django Unchained, the idea of the slave who becomes free and then goes and then kicks the asses of everyone who gave him shit when he was a slave. And I do love the it's a pretty cool structure, this idea of a gladiator revolt. This like I find it amusing, this idea that they didn't really prepare for that. They spend every single day training these people how to kill people, and then what do you know? They're really not prepared for the day when they snap and then they decide to kill you.
Right.
But it is a pretty awesome story, and like I do like Spartacus. He's not about revenge, really. Like the only guy he's revengeful against is probably Batiatus and the guy who was like the captain of the guards and the trainer in the camp. And really, he's not about like let's overthrow Rome. He is more about it is like the Moses thing of like the let my people go. He's all about like let's just try to be free. We're gonna have to kill people to do it, but our aim is to be free. I don't want to be emperor or anything. It's all in the aim of something good.
It's trying to break away and set up their own place, their own lifestyle, like to have their own. It's the independent story. Americans can relate to that. It's that whole thing. And what I find intriguing and neat about it is that historically, the undoing of the Spartacus rebellion was that he kept going back to pillage Roman cities, and nobody really knows why, but he just did, and that ultimately, got him caught. But I like the idea that like they put their trust in these other people, and they show up, and they're not friggin' there. They just let them down. It's like they took our money and they left.
Who knew pirates were untrustworthy?
Right. Well, you know what? It's the baggage holder dropping the bag full of money at the end of the killing. It's just like, what difference does it make? It's shoot me now. It's that same character from Sterling Hayden, and I saw that in this time, and I'm like, it's neat to be able to connect that little through line from early Kubrick to even more early Kubrick like this, and it's like, I wonder if that was him, if that was in the script as such, but it's something they really emphasize that they get there and nobody's home. So it's that whole joke about like, you see those two boys over my shoulder, they're going to help me kick your ass. And then the guy's like, two boys where? And you turn around and they gone. And it's like, oh no. So I found that I laughed at it. I thought it was neat. And it is the undoing of a good rebellion, because the next thing you know is that here comes the Roman army, and you're like, oh, we're screwed. So they have no chance at all against these guys. It's almost the way you feel about like Captain Miller's patrol in Saving Private Ryan in that final battle. If the air support didn't get there in time, they were dead. Like they were all. I mean, most of them were anyway. They were about to get really squashed, and then the P-51 show up, and all is well. But there would have been no Matt Damon going home had that gone the way of Spartacus here. So.
Oh, for sure. And Spartacus, it's a very realistic story of like, this is what would happen if you tried to lead a revolt against, the Roman Empire, which stretched across, half the planet or whatever that was.
Well, it would be like, okay, let's go back to Return of the Jedi for a minute or whatever. Let's say they don't get the shield down and the Death Star wipes out all the rebel frigates, and Darth Vader kills Luke.
Exactly.
or the Emperor does, and they're like, that's the end of that. So there it is. Everybody's hung up on a torch, and we're frying Ewoks for dinner. I mean, that's, maybe that would have been better. I don't know, but I mean, that's kind of what happens at the end here. So, it's I like the final fight between him and Antonius, though. Tony. I'm just going to call him Tony. I like the way that goes down, because it's the best sword fight in the movie. It's the most personal one, too. And I feel like if Kubrick had control over anything, it's how that went down and how it was shot and played out. And I think it's probably Tony Curtis's best stuff in the film. And I think Douglas really gives a lot to it, too. I liked that whole sequence of the fight and how he dies.
Yes, I'm conflicted on this scene, because I love the scene and like the way it ends, like character wise with those two people. I think that's actually like really well done. Like I would say the last 30 minutes of the entire movie is like it kind of decided to suddenly get really good in the tail end. Yeah. But I But here's something I really hated, and I don't know who to blame for this one, but it's like they tease us. Crassus saying, once he finds out who Spartacus is, he says, you and Antoninus are going to duke it out in the Colosseum, like the Roman arena. So I'm thinking, oh man, like I was thinking, oh, I didn't know this movie was going to end in a big, fight in the Colosseum. That's probably going to look insane with the budget of this movie. And then very suddenly, Kirk Douglas spits in Olivier's face and said, now we're just going to do it right here in the dark at 2 a.m. It's like, oh, come on. Like, for a movie that cost like $12 million, and at that time, that was about $99 million today. It's like, that was weak. Like, as far as like the spectacle, it's like, oh, this giant epic, and they did a nice job with the battle, and then to follow it up with this climax where, it's involving, there's like 10 people in the whole scene. That part I was disappointed by, but the drama of the scene of they're both trying to kill the other guy very intensely, as like you would in any other fight to the death. But their reasoning is they each want to kill the other guy so the other guy doesn't suffer more.
Right.
And it really is a great it is a great fight scene. It is a really powerful moment when Spartacus he gets the drop on him and he finally kills him. And what reminded me of was the scene in Spielberg's Hook, which definitely stole this scene when Rufio is killed by Peter. But it's a good moment. And like in his last lines, as he says to Peter Pan, I wish I had a dad like you. And Tony Curtis says the exact same thing of like, you were more a father to me than my father. It is a very good scene. But I got to say, as far as like the movie magic and what Hollywood can do, is like, really, that's the best you got?
Yeah, no, it doesn't fit in that. And I think that's the reason I did like it, because I felt let down by the battle scenes a little bit. That it was
Me too, yeah.
So maybe I liked it more because it was more personal, and it would have been great had it been in a big arena and all that stuff. The honest truth is that they were shooting this in Death Valley, and they were probably up against a huge deadline and couldn't get it done. And they had already used all the extras budget at that point for the battle scenes. So I like that it's more personal and that it's not this sprawling thing that it probably should have been. You're right, but I like the more personal touch to it. And the fact that, again, like we said, you got two guys that are trying to kill each other for the same reason. I don't want you to suffer, because I know what crucifixion does. And, I mean, crucifixion is an elaborate way to suffocate someone. It's really what it is. And it's a horrible way to die, and still is to this day. And so it's just I could see these characters would know exactly what that meant, what that fate was. And both being noble as they were, wouldn't want the other to have to suffer it.
Oh yeah, it is very tragic and sad, and so it also is like really dark. The idea of I'm going to kill you, and in winning that fight, I'm going to suffer the most I've ever in my life. Like each character is really trying to sacrifice themselves. It's like I said, it's a great scene. Like I'm surprised. Like I never heard of that scene. Whenever I heard people talk about this movie, no one ever mentions that scene. It was like, that's the best scene in the movie.
No, it's a fantastic one. I agree. I'm going to say now, it's limited by a little bit of the fact that what comes after it is so obvious in some way. Like it's just, I guess I'm just jaded by the fact of, I want the movie to end, and I understand why it needs to end the way it does, with Verena bringing the son and the crying on the crucified feet and all that goodbye my life, goodbye my love business. It's the time and era and stuff. But I just feel like that's such a romantic, goofy ending to something that's tried to not be that in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
but
it's very drawn out.
Yes, goes on way too long, like this entire movie. I think you're right. There's a fan edit of this that is probably an hour and 45 minutes that would be awesome. And
probably
maybe somebody's done it. Maybe John Jansen's done it, but or he should. But boy, what we've got is, it, like a lot of things in this movie, just goes on way too long, and it's overwrought with emotion that's hard to buy, again, from a character that I felt like had nothing to do. This woman has been, I have no reason to invest in her other than Spartacus wants to be with her, but I don't really care. That's not what his whole thing was anyway. He just wanted land. So, I don't know. It's flat. It just like I watch it, I'm like, and scene, you know. So.
Oh yeah, like in Gladiator, what they did is they gave that kind of farewell moment. They gave that to the guy who knew him best, like Jaimin Hansu, who like buries that the little statues of the family and says, one day I'll meet you, but I'll see you again, but not yet. It's like that was way more powerful than this interaction with these two people that should be madly in love. And on a side note, I'm not really a fan of the score, and I got really sick of the romantic theme of these two characters. It was so like if you did a sketch of like a Saturday Night Live sketch and you wanted to make fun of cheesy music, just use that theme from the love theme from Spartacus.
Yeah, Alex North not on my high list of composers. I was like, it's obvious. I mean, it's like, and I won't deny that that's probably Douglas in the studio going, sound like this, and that he just did what he was told. Particularly back in those days. I mean, and that still happens today. I mean, I could get that, but it's not that's the other thing I think maybe hurts the film in the long run, Kurt. There's not a memorable score. Like, I can hum you the theme to Ben-Hur if you want and stuff, but I can't do it. I can't do, or if you hear like the music in Lawrence of Arabia, like, that music.
For sure, yeah.
This movie, I wouldn't know it from anything else. It's, I mean, I'll tell you, my first real understanding of this was a movie or whatever is from the Tom Hanks joint, That Thing You Do, and the drummer's always talking about I Am Spartacus, and said at a time when that would have been the movie he had seen, and he wrote a drum jazz riff around that idea. But there's nothing about that screams this movie, and I didn't expect it to, but I just sort of laughed at myself. I was like, man, no wonder that guy was a one-hit wonder. He latched onto the wrong movie, but maybe that was the point Hanks was making. I don't know. So, well, I think we're at the point of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts and popcorn ratings for the film. So what are yours for Spartacus?
Well, like I've said, I could tell almost every step of the way that this was not a Kubrick movie by and large. And that's simply because it's the only movie Kubrick made that he didn't write, he didn't cast, he didn't prepare himself, spending years of pre-production or even years editing or whatever. He jumped into someone else's movie with a plot he did not create and actors he did not cast. Who knows who he actually would have cast as Crassus and Spartacus? We'll never know. Not to mention the costumes he didn't approve, and the sets and so forth. He did not have final cut. And so I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Kubrick made his own, Roman epic. If it would have been totally different characters, if it would have been like Gladiator, or if it would have been like Paths of Glory, or if it would have been like The Killing, or who knows what it could have been. But I can't say I like this movie, sadly. It's like a podcast co-host of mine, Franco Asmael. I did a few pods with him, and he said, when I said I was going to see it, he said, yeah, it's fine, but don't expect a Kubrick movie. And I kind of needed that going in, because if you went into this expecting this is like a Roman epic from the guy who made 2001 A Space Odyssey, you'd be like, oh, this is going to be amazing. But with lower expectations, you got to, even with the lower expectations, it's like, I can't say I like it. I like elements of it. And most of those tend to be the certain performances. Like I like Kirk Douglas. I loved Peter Ustinov and Charles Laughton and Woody Strode. But the rest of the actors, they range from forgettable to outright terrible. Like John Dahl, the guy who plays Glabrus, that is one guy in the movie I just said, this guy sucks. And I don't often just outright say a guy just flat out is terrible. It's like, that guy, you got no business being in a Stanley Kubrick movie. But again, Kubrick didn't cast the guy. Mm-hmm. But I think like this movie, it is way too long. Like you look one more time, you look at Gladiator, a movie which managed to do a similar story with a very similar scope, but did it 30 minutes shorter and with way more impact. I think it's a good story, can't deny that, with some good characters. But honestly, this is the only Kubrick movie I've seen where I think, you know what, they ought to remake it. And they have sort of with the TV show. But what I mean is, like, with remakes, I think remakes should be saved for movies they didn't get right the first time. Like, they need to take another crack at it. And Spartacus falls into that category for me. And like those first two Kubrick movies, Fear and Desire and Killer's Kiss, were so minor we didn't even review them. Mm-hmm. You can overlook those movies. But Spartacus is such an epic and is such a notable movie and a classic Hollywood movie that it's impossible to overlook and just give a pass to. So I kind of have to like accept it and realize by today's standards, I got to say it's a little bit of a mediocre movie. I can't just give it a pass. So I have to say I'm pretty disappointed with the movie, sadly. And it gets a small popcorn from me.
You know, I reserve my medium popcorn rating sometimes for movies that could have been so much better, but they just screw out. You know, somewhere along the way, it just misses. And that's the very definition of this film. It looks good. There's some really great looking shots in it. There's nothing really spectacular, but it looks great. Douglas is fine in it. I liked Olivier. You didn't, but you know, I got that out of it. There's some fun in it. There's a good through line, but it's really long and it's really boring at times. I'm not going to lie. And I'll be honest with you. I don't think you have, if you're a Kubrick like fan or you're getting into Kubrick and you're like, I want to watch all the Kubrick films like we've done here or whatever. I mean, you could watch some just clips on YouTube and be okay. Like, I really don't, you don't have to sit and watch this, you know. I mean, I found the 2 VHS cassettes for $5 at an antique store flea market thing, and I was like, you know, and I was like, that's about what it's worth, you know. And I was like, you know, it may give me an excuse to use my functioning VCR. So, which is, I may be the only person listening to this that still has one. But, I mean, I kind of feel about this movie like there's nothing in it that says Kubrick. There's nothing in it that's really like demonstrably Kirk Douglas either, other than that chin. And I'm like, you know, it's fun, but it's not really great. And like, if I were to tell somebody like, hey, you should watch it, I'd probably tell people, watch El Cid, watch Ben-Hur. You get you get the same kind of story and better, and watch Gladiator, you know. Maybe even just the theatrical of Gladiator. Ridley and his director's cuts, I could spend years on that, but I mean, watch that. I mean, I think this movie is. I haven't seen the TV show, so I'm curious if people have seen it. Tell us how it is. You know, right on the Facebook posts and stuff, and let us know what you think of it. I'm curious to see how good that is compared to this, and if there's anything at all other than just the basic story and the title character in it, or if they just are like, we're not touching that thing from the 50s that's really more about Red Scare and let's all, you know, I'm not going to name names than it is about anything else. And we didn't really talk about that movie, but that's a big part of what this movie was made for. This feels more like a movie that has a political statement behind it that isn't influenced by the director, and that's a hard thing to watch. It's the same way that you can see Fincher stuff in Alien 3, but you also understand why he eventually just walked away from it, because there's so many hands in that movie that you don't know whose it really is. Exactly. You know, it's probably as much Sigourney's as anything else, just to put a point on that. And this is probably as much Douglas as it is a Kubrick film. So I go medium popcorn on it, and the fact that it's just mediocre. I feel like it's so painfully mediocre, but I didn't go into it with any expectations because I hadn't heard a lot about it. Nobody had ever built it up to me. In fact, I even asked my dad about it because he was, you know, like you, is a big fan of this country. He's like, I don't even really remember that one. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, well, no, that tells me all I need to know, because my dad is Mr. Sword and Sandal movie. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, if he doesn't remember it, then it didn't make any impression at all. So, medium popcorn. I'm interested to move to the next one, too, because I know the story about Lolita. And I know what it's about, and I've seen the Jeremy Irons version. I've never seen the Kubrick version either. So this is going to be a first time for both of us next time with Lolita. Much different subject matter 2 years later than what we're dealing with here. And well, as we know, this is the last time Kubrick didn't have complete control over what the story was, and probably the reason. But you know what? For as much as we want to dismiss Spartacus, because it was a hit, it gave him the in with the studios to then do the things he wanted to do. And we're eventually going to get to some stuff that's, you know, is considered classic cinema. And I'm curious to look at something like Dr. Strangelove and Clockwork Orange. And, you know, 2001 is going to be a different discussion, but to look at things and see, where do these hold up? What does he say? And why is this way? You know, it's going to be fun to ride through this. So, folks, thanks for joining us on this latest edition of Film Strip. Of course, if you follow us on our Facebook page, our webpage, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies, you can find all of our old episodes there. You can also find all of it in the back catalog on our iTunes feed, Stitcher, and Google Play. We're on all of them. And hey, folks, we got some recent reviews in, some really good ones on iTunes. Really appreciate that. If you're using, you know, iTunes for your podcatcher and stuff, leave us a good review. It really helps people find the show. We don't do donations subscription drives or any of that kind of stuff. We just put out a lot of content. We've got over 200 episodes there. A lot of variety. I mean, you know, we'll do Kubrick movies and then we'll turn around and Kurt's on a movie like Anaconda, you know, so it just depends, you know, on what hits us. We got a lot of stuff there. So check it out. Let us know what you think. And if you're on one of the other ones, Stitch or Google Play, leave us a review. It helps other people find the show. That's all we really want to do is just try to get the podcast out to as many people as possible. We appreciate your support. Catch up with us on social media and we'll be glad to interact with you there as well. Until next time, for Kurt, I'm Jay. Thanks for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and link up with us on Facebook. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121.